Who do you think that leader should be?
Well, I've set out criteria which I think should apply to whoever's the next leader, and that means we should have somebody that's willing to engage. You have to do that in a parliament of minorities. Somebody that's experienced and somebody that will bring unity, hopefully to the parliament, but certainly to the party. So I think somebody who fulfils those criteria, and I think one of those that does that would be John Swinney, but there may well, of course, be others as well.
You're talking about John Swinney there. I'll be honest, it's a name that we've been hearing increasingly often as the day has gone on. Just to read you a tweet by the SNP's Joanna Cherry. She said, as Humza, who should be thanked for his service, will remain First Minister until we have a new leader, there's no need for an unseemly rush by the old boys club to stitch up the succession. The leader of the SNP should be chosen by our members, not by men in grey suits. Now, I know, of course, you're saying that there may be others. John Swinney is your preferred candidate. Everyone can have a preferred candidate. But it does feel a little bit like we might be heading towards the men in grey suits stitching this up. How important do you think it is for the SNP to have a contest and not a coronation?
Well, I think the SNP membership will decide that, but just on your point about an old boys club, I should point out, of course, that in the Scottish Parliament we have more SNP MSPs.
Well, that's
female than
Joanna
male.
Cherry's phrase, old boys club, not mine, just to be clear.
I'm
It's
just
Joanna
making the
Cherry's
point, though,
phrase.
Yeah. Well, she's mentioned the phrase old boys club. Most of the cabinet, the majority of the cabinet are female, and of course we had a very lengthy period with a female leader, so anybody can come forward for this contest. I just mentioned John Swinney as one person that meet the criteria, which I think are very important for the new leader, whoever that is. And of course we should be willing to see anybody that wants to come forward to undertake a bid to become leader. But I think those criteria, experience, willingness to engage and to unify, are very important.
You've seen a relatively rapid overturn of leaders. Humza Yousaf, of course, didn't have a mandate from the Scottish people. He didn't have an election in Holyrood. The next leader won't either. Because the next election isn't due until 2026, do you think the new leader of the SNP should call an election?
No, I don't. In Scotland we have a fixed term parliament set by Westminster. People elected MSPs in 2021. They expect them to serve a 5-year term, and I would point out to those that are calling for it, in particular the Labour Party, I think they've had 8 leaders in the time that we've had 2 leaders. They've also, I think, had 3 former First Ministers that didn't have an election when they became First Ministers. They've also had Gordon Brown, and even going back to Jim Callaghan in the 70s, and they just elected a new First Minister in Wales without an election. So I think in Scotland what people are interested in is making sure we don't end up, as has happened in the rest of the UK, having to pay prescription charges with the huge council tax hikes that we've seen in the rest of the UK as well. And they're safeguarded in those things by a continuing
Just to come in on the election
government
point, because I do think it's important. I can't help thinking that, if another party went through 2 leaders in quick succession without going to the British people, the SNP would be quick out of the blocks saying, accusing them of not having a mandate. That's what you would do, isn't it?
I think it's important to bear in mind the circumstances. So if you think about Liz Truss, the chaos that surrounded Liz Truss, or Boris Johnson, or Rishi Sunak initially as well, or Theresa May, it's because of the chaos. And also the fact is, of course, in Scotland we can't just call an election. It's a 5-year term. People vote for that. And also,
yes,
this is a parliament of minorities, very common across Europe.
It would be unthinkable for the next leader of the SNP to go 2 years without seeking a democratic mandate, wouldn't it?
Well, the democratic mandate that we sought and got in 2021 was for a 5-year term of this Parliament. That's set. It's not something, as with Westminster, where they agree they'll have fixed terms and then just change it. We can't do that in Scotland. People understood they were voting. 64 out of 129 MSPs were much bigger than any other party. We've governed, in my view, extremely well. We've got a far better health service, despite what you hear from Keir Starmer, than his party in Wales. And they've got the right to expect continuity in government, and that's what we'll deliver from the SNP. We won't have the council tax increases, the prescription charges, the tuition fees. We'll continue to govern in the interest of the people of Scotland.
It's interesting, you're saying there you're proud of your record, that the health service doing better in Wales. I should point out that 1 in 6 Scots are still on an NHS waiting list. For a decade, it's felt like the SNP has almost defied political gravity. Do you feel that recently that's changed?
Well, first of all, in the waiting figures, I noticed in Wales it's 1 in 5 people on waiting lists. We've not had a single day strike in our health service because of pay disputes. That's Humza Yousaf's work and Nicola Sturgeon's work. So we do have a far better health service. We perform much better in terms of A&E figures as well. And in relation to the SNP, we have the strongest party by far. We have far more members than any other party, far more seats here at Westminster and in the Scottish Parliament. We're a very strong party, and there's two reasons for that. One is because, unlike the other parties, we will always stand up for Scotland. We don't answer to another head office elsewhere. And also our belief in independence gives us that driving force, that driving focus, which is absent that we see from what we see in other parties who, like the Labour Party just now in Scotland, play political games all the time without having any serious perspectives for government. So I think the SNP remains very strong. I'm not trying to wish away the issues which have been taking place over the last few weeks and months. Of course they're serious, but now we have to get down to business, get a new First Minister and crack on with governing in the interest of the people of Scotland.
So, if the SNP's got such a... Well done, by the way, with the noise behind you. It's always hard in these circumstances. But just listening to you, you know, SNP, great record, things are going really well. Humza Yousaf was a great leader. What's gone wrong?
Well, we have had, obviously, the issues that have arisen over the course of the last week in terms of the agreement with the Greens and the way that was ended. The First Minister was quite honest and upfront, very bravely today, to say he thinks he could have handled that in a different way. So that's the most immediate recent thing. But of course we have had issues in the party in the absence or following the resignation of Nicola Sturgeon. Now, I would point out we have been 17 years in government. We've been continuously re-elected by the people of Scotland. So it's not just me that's saying the SNP is doing a good job. We have a better health service. We've got higher paid nurses, higher paid police officers, higher paid doctors. We have better public services in general, despite what you hear all the time from people that really don't know about the situation in Scotland, like Jeremy Hunt on your programme or Keir Starmer. We are doing well, and the people of Scotland, like the SNP government, we have to make sure now we repay that trust, we get a new First Minister, and we carry on dealing with the interests of the people of Scotland who are suffering under the effects of Westminster in terms of the cost of living crisis, the energy costs. We are trying to help people with that. Lifted 100,000 children out of poverty this year with the child payment. So we are doing the right things. We have to keep on doing them. It will be different and challenging now because, of course, in a parliament of minorities, you have to seek agreement to get those measures through, but that's what we'll try to do.